So in general, functional equivalence has merit to the customers of data processing services. However, in my opinion, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to realize in practice. This is because of two main reasons. So first, functional equivalence requires that services are defined into service types, as the principle can only apply to services of the same service type. Now, it's conceptually and then also in practice very difficult to delineate services in the very detail. So when is a service similar and when is it different? The second reason is that the functional equivalence criterion connects the output and the performance of a service at the destination service provider to the conduct of the original service provider. So a service provider can become responsible for the output at another service provider. In practice, this can create a lot of uncertainties and also opens the room for litigation if it's unclear what causes a subpar performance at a service provider. So in our report, we suggested to replace the functional equivalence criterion and replace it with a hypothetical same service test that refers and looks at the original service provider. So the main idea is that if you take the portable data that you get from the original service provider and you put that back in at the original service provider, you can test whether you end up with the same service of the same quality and the same performance. So therefore, you don't need the service classification, and you also disconnect this responsibility between service providers. However, it still maintains that everything you get from the original destination provider will be sufficient to establish the same service if the destination service provider is as efficient as the original provider. In my opinion, data portability for data processing services represent an important and significant step forward to achieve the goals of the Data Act. The data portability rules consider, on the one hand, the benefits, but also the costs that come with regulation, and especially with the Data Act as a symmetric and horizontal law that apply to all firms equally. Interoperability regulation may sometimes be needed in addition. However, in my opinion, this should then warrant a specific assessment of the specific services and a specific problem at hand. Therefore, in the report, we suggested to apply mandatory interoperability regulation only in the case if data portability is found to be ineffective or if there are other market failures identified. Smaller players can benefit from horizontal interoperability regulation because it's easier for customers to switch between services. So they may gain customers from existing services. However, this is not a one-way street because the Data Act is a symmetric regulation. So it is also a risk for smaller businesses that they are more likely to lose their customers to bigger firms. This is especially the case if bigger firms can benefit from economies of scale or from network effects, which may entice current customers of smaller businesses to change the provider. So by making it easier to switch, it is not necessarily clear whether this will benefit the smaller firms or more established players in the market. In addition, interoperability regulation requires the specification and agreement on technical standards. Now, smaller players will likely find it more difficult to influence these standards and tailor them to their specific businesses. Therefore, there's the risk that smaller players have to adhere to the rules and standards set by bigger players in the markets, which could limit the possibility for differentiation and specialization.